Hi everyone and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about Chinese dynasties. Why do you need to know about Chinese dynasties? Well, the fact is that Chinese people talk about their history a lot. It's not just because we're proud of our history and love talking about it, but it's also because Chinese history is just so long and so many significant events have happened in the past that still have lasting consequences to this very day, and that it's just impossible not to mention the elephant in the room. What's more, history offers a lot of wisdom and lessons that are still useful to us to this very day. So, if you're a tourist visiting China, chances are that your tour guide would say things like, this tower was built by the Wu Kingdom during the Three Kingdoms period. Or they'll say things like, this building complex served as China's imperial palace during the Ming and Qing dynasties. Or you might be reading articles discussing current affairs, which will say things like, China must not legalize marijuana. Remember the lessons of opium addiction during the late Qing dynasty? And if you're studying the Chinese language, you might notice the numerous Chinese idioms referencing ancient dynasties and states. All in all, if you're a foreigner visiting China or dealing with Chinese people, having some basic knowledge of Chinese history really does help you make better sense of the land, the culture, and the language. First things first, some basics that you need to know. First, Chinese people like to say 华夏上下五千年, meaning that our history can be traced back to 5,000 years ago, which is a heck of a long time. Second, China's history is marked by alternating periods of unity and disunity. There's a saying, 合久必分,分久必合, meaning that long periods of unity are followed by division and vice versa. When united, China tends to be strong, stable, prosperous, and influential. Of course, the opposite tends to be true when China is fragmented. Third, the concept of dynasties or 朝代. A dynasty is essentially a series of emperors along the same bloodline. For example, father to son, elder brother to younger brother. If somebody in a different family becomes emperor, the original dynasty ends and a new dynasty begins. Dynasties could be incredibly short, such as the Qin dynasty, which lasted only 15 years, or they could be incredibly long, such as the Zhou dynasty, which lasted 791 years. During times of unity, China would be ruled under one single dynasty, but during times of disunity, there might be two or more dynasties coexisting at the same time. Throughout China's long history, there have been over 80 dynasties, but in this video, we're just going to be focusing on the major ones. Let's start off at the very beginning, the semi-mythological era of Chinese history known as the Three Sovereigns and Five Emperors, or 三皇五帝, which predates all of the dynasties. I'm not going to delve into the exact identities of the Three Sovereigns and Five Emperors because there are many different versions of this and it's all rather messy. But suffice to say that the three sovereigns were godlike beings who were credited for creating human beings, discovering fire, inventing agriculture and fishing, and experimenting with herbal medicine, etc. As for the five emperors, they were less gods but more like sages who ruled over the land with their wisdom. The Xi'an dynasty was the very first dynasty in Chinese history and existed around the same time as the Old Assyrian period of Mesopotamia in West Asia. It's associated with the legendary Yu the Great, who tamed the Great Floods and became leader of the land. When Yu the Great died, he passed the throne to his son, effectively starting the tradition of hereditary succession, and thus China's very first dynasty, the Xia, was born. Although previously questioned by some Western scholars, the discovery of the early Tou ruins in Luoyang serves as pretty strong evidence of the Xia dynasty's existence. Also, numerous bronze artifacts were unearthed at the early Tou ruins, which show that the Xia dynasty was actually quite advanced and had already entered the Bronze Age. Needless to say, as China's first dynasty, The Xi'an dynasty holds a very special place in Chinese culture, and even today, China is often called Huaxia, and the Chinese people still call ourselves descendants of the Xia, or Huaxia Zizun. If you want to know more about the Xia dynasty or the early Tang Romans, check out my other video, the link of which I've posted below. Next is the Shang dynasty, which existed roughly around the same time as the Greek Minoan and Mycenaean civilizations. The Shang people were very superstitious and would engage in fortune-telling by burning turtle shells and animal bones until they cracked, and they would write their predictions and post-event verifications on those shells and bones. These Chinese characters have come to be known as Oracle Bone Script, or 甲骨文. The Shang dynasty also saw an increased production of bronze artifacts, many with Chinese characters inscribed on them. These bronze inscriptions, or 金文, together with the oracle bone scripts, are the earliest known forms of Chinese characters. The Shang people were also incredibly cruel and engaged in extensive slavery and human sacrifices, and maybe even some cannibalism. If you want to know more, check out my video about the ancient Shang capital city. Again, the link is found below. Next up, we have the Zhou dynasty, an incredibly long dynasty that we mentioned earlier. The Zhou dynasty marked the height of China's Bronze Age and saw the casting of loads of bronze artifacts with incredible detail. Many of these bronze artifacts were inscribed with lengthy articles that recorded victories and battles and other important historical events. The Zhou dynasty also introduced the concept of mandate of heaven, the idea that the emperor's authority is granted by heaven based on virtue. It was also from the Zhou dynasty that the emperor started to be called the Son of Heaven, or Tianzi, a practice that would continue until 1912 with the collapse of China's last dynasty. The Zhou dynasty is actually divided into the Western Zhou dynasty and the Eastern Zhou dynasty. The distinction between them is that the Western Zhou dynasty was a period of strength and unity, while the Eastern Zhou dynasty was a period of disunity, when the empire grew weak and the feudal lords that once paid allegiance to the emperor started to gain independence and do their own thing. The Eastern Zhou dynasty is in turn split into the Spring and Autumn period, or 春秋时代, and the Warring States period, 战国时代. During the Spring and Autumn period, there were still hundreds of feudal lords who still kind of respected the emperor, and the feudal states still coexisted with each other in relative harmony, although the larger states were already starting to gobble up the smaller ones. During this period, 5 of the strongest states were able to rise to the peak of their power and claim dominance over the other states. These were the so-called 5 hegemons, or 春秋五霸, and were respectively Qi, Jin, Qin, Song, Chu. By the beginning of the Warring States period, only a dozen-odd feudal states remained, and the feudal lords largely ignored the emperor, only paying lip service at best, and were fighting tooth and nail against each other. By the latter part of the period, there were only 7 states left, the so-called 7 warring states, or 战国七雄, Qin, Qi, Yan, Chu, Wei, Zhao, and Han. The Spring and Autumn and Warring States periods were an era of war and turmoil. But it was also a golden age full of ideas and philosophies. During this period, great thinkers and brilliant minds toured across China, trying to sell their ideas to the feudal lords. These people included Sun Tzu, the guy who wrote The Art of War, Lao Tzu, the father of Taoism, and Confucius, the creator of his namesake philosophy, Confucianism. By coincidence, a similar phenomenon was also happening in Greece around the same time, with the emergence of a number of great philosophers such as Aristotle, Socrates, and Plato. At the end of the Warring States period, the state of Qin conquered the other 6 states and established the Qin dynasty. Though it was short-lived and lasted only 15 years, it was absolutely pivotal in Chinese history. The dynasty's founding emperor, Qin Shihuang, is widely regarded as the greatest Chinese emperor of all time because of his incredible accomplishments. First, he unified China, ending feudalism in China and creating China's first centralized bureaucracy. Second, he standardized China's writing system, weights, measures, and roads. Third, he constructed the Great Wall of China by linking existing walls of the previous warring states. The Qin dynasty was so impactful to the world that the name of China in English and numerous other languages is actually derived from the word Qin. If you want to know more about the Qin dynasty, Empress Shihuang, and the terracotta army buried around his tomb, do check out this video, the link of which is posted below. The Han Dynasty, which coincided with much of the Roman Empire in the West, was a golden age in Chinese history. The Han Dynasty lends its name to numerous things related to China, including the Han Chinese or Hanzu, China's major ethnic group, and Chinese characters or Hanzi that are used not only in China but also in Korea, Japan, and until the modern era, Vietnam. The Han Dynasty also saw the expansion of China's territory into present-day Xinjiang, making possible the Silk Road. Other very significant events that happened during the Han Dynasty include the invention of paper, the spread of Buddhism into China, and the promotion of Confucianism as China's state philosophy. Just so you know, the Han Dynasty is split into the Western Han and the Eastern Han dynasties, briefly interrupted by a very short-lived Xin dynasty in the middle. After the Han Dynasty collapsed, China again devolved into a long period of disunity collectively known as the Wei, Jin, and the Southern and Northern dynasties, or Wei Jin Nanbei Chao. It began with the Three Kingdoms period, or the Sanguo, a three-state rivalry between the stronger Wei in the north and the weaker Shu and Wu in the south. China was very briefly reunified under the Jin, but soon fragmented again, giving rise to a long period of north-south rivalry with a quick succession of short-lived dynasties on each part. This period is incredibly messy, which even the average Chinese person can't wrap their heads around, except for the Three Kingdoms period, of course. Heck, if there's one period in Chinese history that you absolutely need to know, then it's the Three Kingdoms period for sure. The history is so exciting and so frequently discussed, not only by Chinese people, but also by the Japanese and Koreans as well. It was made famous by the epic novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms, or Sanguo Yan Yi, and has been turned into countless TV drama, anime, movie spin-offs, and even video games. Important characters during the Three Kingdoms period include the Shu Emperor Liu Bei and his two sworn brothers Guan Yu and Zhang Fei, the loyal Prime Minister Zhuge Liang, and the cunning antagonist Cao Cao. If you want to know more about these guys, check out these videos. Again, I've posted the links below. Next, we have the Sui Dynasty, which reunified China and ended all the chaos. The Sui Dynasty was quite short-lived and was closely followed by the much longer and influential Tang Dynasty, so the two dynasties are often mentioned together and simply referred to as the Sui Tang era. What's noteworthy about the Sui Dynasty, though, is that 1. It was the period of time during which China's imperial examination system, or Keju, first began to take shape. And 2. It saw the construction of China's Grand Canal, linking China's political north with its economic south. The Tang Dynasty existed around the same time as the early Middle Ages in Europe and the rise of Islam in West Asia. Like the Han Dynasty before it, the Tang Dynasty was incredibly powerful and influential and was a golden age in Chinese history. Even today, many Chinese people in the south and overseas still call ourselves Tangren, and Chinatowns are called Tangjie in Chinese. The Tang Dynasty's influence extended far beyond its borders to places like Japan, Korea, and Southeast Asia, fundamentally shaping their cultures. Even today, the Japanese and Korean languages still preserve many loanwords that were borrowed from Tang Dynasty China. The Japanese kimono is also said to be modeled from Tang Dynasty fashion. Tang Dynasty's capital city, Chang'an, was probably the world's largest and grandest city at the time. It was the starting point of the Silk Road and was frequented by numerous merchants, diplomats, and scholars from all over the world. Fun fact, the Tang Dynasty was briefly interrupted by the Wuzhou Dynasty under the rule of China's one and only female emperor, Zetian. Again, if you want to know more about Chang'an City and Zetian, check out my other videos with the links below. After the Tang Dynasty, China devolved again into disunity and chaos, and saw a quick succession of 5 dynasties in the north and numerous other kingdoms alongside, the strongest of which were known as the 10 Kingdoms. Collectively, they were known as the 5 Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms, or 5代十国. Again, this period of history is incredibly messy and confusing, so unless you're a history buff, I'd advise that you simply ignore it. The Song Dynasty coincided roughly with the High and Late Middle Ages in Europe, including the Norman conquest of England and the Crusades. Compared to its predecessor, the Tang Dynasty, the Song Dynasty's territory had greatly diminished. Militarily speaking, it was also pretty weak. It was constantly bullied by its aggressive northern neighbours, first the Khitans, then the Jurchens, and finally the Mongols. However, in terms of economic prosperity, commerce, and science, the Song Dynasty was yet another golden age, and saw the invention of the world's first paper currency, the jiaozi, as well as movable type printing. Gunpowder and the magnetic compass, while invented much earlier, began to be widely implemented during this period in the fields of warfare and navigation, respectively. Another noteworthy fact is that the Song Dynasty is divided into the larger and stronger Northern Song Dynasty versus the smaller and weaker Southern Song Dynasty after being invaded by the Jurchens. Again, if you want to know more about the Northern Song Dynasty and its capital city Kaifeng, check out this video and the link below. The Mongols conquered China and established the Yuan Dynasty, the first unified Chinese dynasty to be ruled by non-Han Chinese. The dynasty also saw the incorporation of Tibet into China's territory. Externally, the Yuan dynasty was very powerful and had the largest territory in all of China's dynasties. It was also during this time that Marco Polo traveled to China, and news about this powerful empire quickly spread to Europe. Internally, though, the Mongols ruled China under a class system that was highly oppressive and racially discriminant, whereby the entire population was divided into 4 classes, with the Mongols on top and the Southern Han Chinese at the bottom. Naturally, the system wasn't very conducive to social stability, and the Han Chinese soon rebelled and kicked the Mongols out of China. The Ming Dynasty coincided with Europe's Age of Discovery and its colonial conquest of the Americas. Almost a century before Columbus's discovery of the Americas, the Ming Dynasty eunuch Zheng He led a series of maritime explorations reaching the shores of Arabia and the Horn of Africa. What's different, though, is that the ships in Zheng He's fleet were many times the size of Columbus's, and the expeditions were non-violent and non-expansionist. The Ming Dynasty is also famous for its porcelain, and to this day, people still often refer to Chinese porcelain as Ming China. During the Ming Dynasty, the Forbidden City in Beijing was constructed to serve as the imperial palace, which continued to be used in the subsequent Qing Dynasty. It was also during this period of time that large parts of the Great Wall of China were revamped, renovated, and fortified. To this day, the Forbidden City and the Great Wall remain 2 of the most popular tourist destinations in Beijing. Finally, we have the Qing Dynasty, China's last imperial dynasty, and the second unified dynasty to be ruled by non-Han Chinese, this time the Manchus. During this era, men were expected to follow the Manchu custom of shaving their foreheads and wearing pigtails. The Qing Dynasty began with prosperity, but the onset of the Opium Wars marked the beginning of what came to be known as the Century of Humiliation. Externally, the Qing dynasty was being attacked by Western powers and was forced to sign unfair treaties, leading to the ceding of Hong Kong to Britain and the establishment of concessions, or Zhuge, in Shanghai, Tianjin, Wuhan, Guangzhou, and numerous other coastal and riverside cities where Western powers were allowed to exercise their jurisdiction within China's borders. Internally, the Qing Empire had to first deal with the Taiping Rebellion, led by a bunch of guys claiming to be Jesus' little brothers, and later the anti-Manchu uprisings led by Sun Yat-sen and the other revolutionaries, which ultimately led to the dynasty's collapse. If you want to know more about the anti-Manchu uprisings, check out my video below. The Republic of China, or ROC for short, wasn't a dynasty, but rather marked the end of China's imperial dynastic rule and the beginning of China's modern era. During this period, China rapidly modernized. Western thoughts such as science and democracy were introduced and embraced, along with Western fashion and Western ways of doing things. Nevertheless, the ROC was still going through the Century of Humiliation and struggled to cope with invasions by Western powers and the Japanese, as well as lots of infighting, first between warlords and then between the Kuomintang and the Communist Party of China. The ROC era ended in 1949 when the Communist Party chased the Kuomintang out of mainland China and established the current regime, the People's Republic of China, or PRC for short. So, there you have it. An overview of China's long history and its major dynasties. I know it all sounds very complicated and hard to take in, but there's actually a mnemonic that might be able to help you. Are you ready? The mnemonic goes like this: 夏商周 秦汉 隋唐 宋元明清. Repeat this several times and you should be able to memorize it pretty easily. If you want to be a little bit more advanced, you might also try to remember that all of this is preceded by the Sanhua Wuyi. The Zhou dynasty is divided into the Eastern Zhou and Western Zhou, which is also known as Chunqiu Zhanguo. The Han dynasty is divided into the Western Han and Eastern Han, which is in turn followed by a long period of disunity called the Weijing Nanbei Chao. The Tang dynasty is followed by the Wu Dai Shiguo. The Song dynasty is divided into the Northern Song and Southern Song, and the Qing dynasty is followed by the ROC period. So, there you go. Hope you got something out of this video, and see you next time.